Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
You've wandered back into the tractor beam of Aggressive Negotiations, the podcast where we examine Star Wars questions from a galaxy far, far away that we are the first and the bravest to ask. I am Jedi Master John Mills, and joining me is my dear friend and Star Wars aficionado himself, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, are you ready to delve deep into another topic this week that nobody else is exploring in the Star Wars galaxy?
Sorry. You caught me eating some Wampa wings and
Wampa wings.
Oh man, so good. Baby Wampa wings are the best. But you put a little Naboobian fire sauce on there. It's delicious.
Well, you know what? You got controversial right there because I don't think that we've ever really settled whether it's Naboobian or not. But you can vote in one of our many polls over on Twitter at the Jedi Masters or Twitter at whatever we're calling it nowadays. And you can, of course, find the network at Join Nerd Party, and you can find the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram. And, of course, you can find Matt at MattRushing02 and me at Kessel Junkie. But I am excited because, Matt, This is another sort of Kessel Junkie special here where we're going to be discussing an unexpected topic. And the unexpected topic is this, as I was thinking about this recently, because, you know, on occasion, being a fancy lad, I like to go out to, say, a Chili's and get some street corn or something like that. And, a thought that always enters my mind whenever I go out to eat and that I have to keep out of my mind because I don't like my mind to go in this area while I'm eating in a restaurant, but food safety laws. Food safety regulation. I am accepting the idea that kitchen that I can't see is safe, cleanly managed, and the food was properly prepared, all of this sort of stuff. And I get to thinking, with Star Wars, such a large galaxy, and we've talked about drinking laws, we've talked about different regulations, how monstrously difficult, do you think that they even bothered with food safety regulations on a galactic scale, or do you think they just let every planet try to figure it out on their own? Because how on earth would you manage something like a galactic food industry?
I mean, the first thing I think of is how impossible this would be with the myriads of species in the galaxy and the amount of food allergies they might have to the things that, other species are fine with. I mean, what happens to all of those Tusken Raiders who are allergic to shellfish and, they accidentally run into some in the Mos Eisley Cantina?
I wasn't even thinking about the food allergy aspect. But in all seriousness, Mos Eisley, it's a big spaceport. They have the cantina there. How on earth would they serve like anything that would be edible in there? Because of all the species that come in, is there some sort of waiver? Because here, let's say, for instance, because you and I were both in the United States of America, and we know firsthand from our cultural awareness how litigious we can be. But how on earth would somebody like Wuhair operate the Mos Eisley Cantina without some sort of massive insurance policy? But even setting aside the food allergy thing, you have to be agreeing that when you go in there, did it look like Wuhair was cleaning the glasses? I didn't see a dish rag or a faucet set up at all. So what would that even look like? And what inspector is coming in there? That's why I would think on a galactic scale, they would just say, you know what, we give up. You got to worry about it on a local scale. We can't even get involved in this because you couldn't possibly have the machinery. Yeah.
My give up. So look, I think you can discount the outer rim completely of having any kind of law whatsoever other than what might be enforced by the local government, possibly. If your planet was maybe run by Hutts, then I can imagine them banning anything that they might be allergic to and or kill them. They probably really hate things with salt. I'm just saying.
Probably so.
And so, yeah, I think that's the kind of place where you would see, a planet run by a syndicate or something like that, may have specific laws, dietary restrictions or something. If the people running that syndicate, if there was something that, could kill them. But I think the only place that you would actually see any kind of possible regulation or anything like that would be during the time of, the Republic, and that would probably be on core worlds or, a place like Naboo that's very civilized and that kind of thing. But, it does make me wonder when you talk about food safety and just food in general, it's like either this is a galaxy that doesn't have food allergies and pretty much everybody can eat everything on every planet. We don't have to worry about that stuff. Or, you have to have certain menus for certain types of beings, and so maybe, the Quarren and the Moncals and those type of beings, they can all eat similar foods because they're water creatures, different from, people that are more, traditionally humanoid. So every time I talk about this in this episode, I just keep thinking
Run
of
with
another
it. Run with that tangent
of how
go for it, man.
Mind-boggling
That's the whole
this
point
would
of
be,
this
right?
is I would actually say not during the Republic. I would think if there was any attempt at a food bureaucracy, like a health inspector. I'm not like you're coming from allergies. I'm coming from somebody making sure that the food is stored properly, that it doesn't make you sick, that there are these snap inspections. I think the Empire could use something like that as a perfect reason to have an undercover ISB agent get in place somewhere, or some other sort of spy to be somewhere. Oh, I'm here for a food inspection. But additionally, kind of working against that is, I'd like to say, oh, well, also the Empire would have mechanisms for that because they could see in a way for graft and personal power. But that was a problem for the Republic too.
Sure.
These sort of lower level bureaucrats in a corrupt system, they thrive because they, you either get people who are power mad, you give some people a little bit of power, they go crazy, or you get people who are just in it for themselves and they're just walking around, and it's like the old Roman tax collectors where it's just like, look, just pay me directly and I'll just, we'll work this out. Like it was the mob basically. So but there would be no way, say, for somebody like Wuhair or anybody else who's running a small food establishment to stay up to date with regulations, because you're talking about Outer Rim versus Core Worlds. They even say in the Republic, when I'll go back to Phantom Menace, there are laws against slavery in the Republic. And Shmi basically says that's not here. And that whole thing. So yeah, in the Outer Rim, I agree with you. If you drink something at a local place or you eat something at a local place, that's on you. That's your own luck. Is it possible, though, that people just didn't eat at places like that? That they were watering holes because they knew better, like you would carried your own food around with you, sort of thing?
So I get the food safety part too, because I immediately thought of like Dex's Diner, and the behind that kitchen did not look clean.
Looked cleaner than some of the places I've eaten at, honestly.
It's it looked like one of those ratty old Waffle Houses in a podunk town in the middle of nowhere, United States. Where it looks like the grease on the floor hasn't been cleaned up since like 1972. And so yes, that's the kind of place where it's like, I feel like Dex probably knows a guy to pay off so that he doesn't have to worry about that. And that's why Obi-Wan goes there, because, people that don't want to get, a lot of attention on themselves go hang out there. Right. So I love your idea, though, of like the Empire utilizing that as a way to plant agents in places, and then be able to plant listening devices in places so they can try and catch people, and that kind of thing. I think that's a really interesting idea. But I mean, even just thinking of can you think of the legislation it would take to regulate food safety in the Republic with however many planets
I would say that they could get around that by simply writing a law that basically defers regulatory authority to the discretion of the agency necessary.
That's a good point.
We pass a law saying we don't have to regulate it, that this agency has the authority, and then it gets tied up in the courts, which Palpatine himself talks about, and Padme talks about the problem with that, and finding that balance there.
Right.
But when you boil it down to some planet that's out there, let's stop picking on Wuhair for a second. Let's go to Jeddah in Rogue One. And they're walking through that street bazaar area. There's a lot of street food there. And my wife, she told me when she was going through Bangkok, she's like, there's street food everywhere. And she said, there's no way there's a health inspector walking around making sure that food is okay. But I can also go to New York and they got the street vendors selling hot dogs, and there's the rough patina of regulatory authority over those things where they have certificates and stuff. But if I buy a bag of roasted cashews in winter in New York, I understand the risk I'm taking. And so I think there's got to be lip service to some agency, but it's rarely exercised.
But I also think that this could be a thing to which the Republic and the Senate of the Republic, this is where planetary regulation comes in, that each planet is responsible for its own, food safety because of the different populace that's on that planet. And so, and that would, in some senses, I think, make more sense. That, Naboo has a different food safety regulation than Megiddo. Or than Utapau, or any of these places would have different regulations because it's a different main populace that lives there. We see in Star Wars that every planet kind of seems to have a majority species living on it, and so that would just letting each planet take care of that would make sense. And then on Coruscant, that's where I just feel like, okay, yeah, you let every other planet take care of that. But when the entire galaxy comes together, what's the food regulation like there? You're just like, you know what? Screw it. Just, what you can eat.
But see, that's the only place where I see a galactic scale government able to intervene would be, we would regard it as interstate trade. But if somebody on Naboo wants to have a delicacy from Mon Cal, then you have something where who's regulating the shipping of that food over to ensure that it's safety, because planets will go to war over bad food that's shared. And I know that seems like really reductive, but it's essentially the resources thing. If you send bad fuel to me, if you send bad food to me, that is a diplomatic incident right there. So maybe it's something where the Republic would have at the very least said, listen, your diplomatic corps has to work this out because they didn't have a standing army. So if the Naboo and Mon Cal had a beef with each other over something that got shipped over that was bad, let me extend it out to other goods, right? Just as an example. But obviously the U.S. gets a lot of goods from China for sale. And I remember a kerfluffle roughly, I guess, a decade back from when we're recording this show, maybe more or maybe less. Time blurs, where it was discovered that in some children's toys, lead paint had been used, even though we have regulations against it, caused a small problem, all of these sorts of things.
Right.
You and I have absolutely no lens on whether it actually got solved. We know that there was a news story. We know that there was a regulatory problem, but we relied on the two governmental bodies of, in this case, expanded out to planets, had to work it out. Even though there were laws and regulations and everything, if there were a global government then, which would then be the galactic government in this example, where bad food is shipped over, that's the moment at which that galactic government gets activated. But just even a blockade of a planet required how much debate in the Senate, and then the threat to go to the courts, and then in
Yeah.
between the movies, all of these things. So I think no matter what, I think sadly, money just determined how potentially clean or dirty your food was. And that gets even more depressing because
Yeah.
when you boil it down, whenever we have conversations like this, and maybe I'm way off base, you can tell me if I'm way off base, but whenever you have conversations like this, we seem to come to this point where it's like, this is why nobody would bat an eye when an empire takes over, as bad as it is, because maybe the Republic just did such a bad job of ensuring people's access to everything that they eventually just shrugged and they were like, yeah, whatever. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And food regulation that's a basic thing that we take for granted, is that the food I eat, even if I don't prepare it, is safe. Or if I buy it to prepare it for myself, it's safe, it's regulated, it's monitored.
Right.
And there's a regulatory agency in place, but just on a scale like that, I just don't see how it would be possible. Each planet would probably be synthesizing its own food and delicacies and never trade.
Yeah. What you just said makes a lot of sense, actually. And because on top of the food safety thing and the regulation of food and figuring out and making sure that, the food is well cared for, that it's food that is well prepared, that it's high quality food, all of those things, which absolutely, like you're talking about a nightmare to try and figure out on a galactic scale. Then again, I think you just come down to as well, like the amount of things that people could or could not eat that they could have come in contact with during shipping and all. I mean, that's a nightmare too. And so it also makes me wonder then if that's the type of thing where, you would see different systems have a larger network of food sharing than necessarily on a galactic scale. And so again, like when we see in Solo and you get the Colo clawfish, right? That's a true delicacy that has kind of made its way across the galaxy and seems like it would be incredibly difficult to get a hold of and would cost a fortune to have. And therefore, if you're eating it, it's akin to, eating the rarest Kobe beef, right? That kind of thing. And so that's where I almost feel like if we're trying to like figure out how this would work, it makes more sense for different systems because we know the way the Star Wars galaxy is set up. You have planets that are closer together. They have these kind of systems where you have a few different planets that we're aware of. And them trading food sources would make much more sense because, two, they're much closer anyway. So you're not having to wait, who knows how long to get food shipped. And that's what would make, I think, being, say, on the Outer Rim with a planet like Tatooine that's like, the furthest from the center of the galaxy type of thing, just an incredibly difficult place to get different types of food at all. I mean, where you might have more of, we don't really know necessarily a ton about Star Wars food, but where you might have more prepackaged or like kind of synthesized type of food, almost in a Star Trek sense, than you would in like real food.
Or food that would be processed. Like, I think that I love your system idea where it's like, in some sectors of the galaxy, the food is more trustworthy than others, sort of thing. And so you would make an effort if you could to go out. But again, that gets back to money and access. There has to be something whereby they had some sort of technology where they were able to remove the allergen from the thing that could potentially cause the problem. Because I read somewhere, and if anybody with a peanut allergy wants to correct me on this, please do. I read somewhere that with a peanut, there's that one little nib. When you have the whole peanut and you break it in half because it always has that clean seam. And then there's that one little nib, that one little part at one end. You know the part that I'm talking about where I've been told,
Yeah.
and I have no idea if it's accurate or not, that part contains the majority, if not all of the actual allergens. And so when they grind peanuts, that part is what causes the problem. I could be completely wrong. I am not an expert. I am simply using this as an example to say there would have had to have been, if you cracked hyperspace technology, a way for you to take the food in question and remove, whether it's by irradiation or processing, that allergen. And therefore, this leans into this idea of sectors and access, because those areas would have been where people could experience food from all across the galaxy without fear. And again, I could be completely wrong about this bit of peanut lore that somebody gave me in recent times. And if I am wrong, I hope everybody understands. I'm owning that. Okay, I'm simply repeating back something somebody told me that I haven't verified at this point. I need to do the research, but I say it simply to lean into this thing whereby does it follow that there would have to be some sort of technology whereby they could make the food safe? But again, it would only be in these areas where you have money and access to get the safe version of the food. And so everybody else might even rely on, to your point, like a synthesized paste. Like people lived on a roughly gruel-like setting and they just lived on synthesized rations. And that's why Yoda, when he eats Luke's food kit, looks like a little fish stick, but it's obviously not. And he bites it and he's like, ugh, how do you get so big on, eating food of this kind? And Yoda is playing along to be disgusted by it. It's not natural food that people are eating.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent point. And it is one of the things I think that makes, the idea of whether or not, this would work, really valid. And I think it is one of those really interesting questions of Star Wars, which is when you start to get down to the nitty gritty, you realize just how crazy the idea of a universe like this really is. But at the same time, and unless you're like us and you're just completely insane, you're not ever thinking about these questions because the universe does feel real enough that you can just live in it and enjoy it. And if you want to, you can go to this length and ask, these type of questions.
Yep.
And I think that's really fun. And that speaks to, I think, the way in which, you have something like a Star Trek, which, tries to answer as many of these type of questions as possible.
Indeed.
And then you have like a Star Wars where the way it's written and the way everything comes together, you don't need to ask these questions because that's not really the point of the story. The point of the story for Star Wars has always been so much more and this sounds weird to say against Star Trek, but the morality tale part of it, the thematic elements, the large mythology, the big mythology, and that's something that's very different from getting into the minutia of how does hyperspace work? How does this work? How does that work? None of that matters because it's all just in service of telling a outlandish and an incredibly fun and interesting and surprisingly sometimes moving story, right? And so, yeah, I was just, as you were talking and we've been talking about this, I was just left with that. It's like, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like we don't even have to care about these things unless we want to, and that's kind of the beauty of it. But then you can start talking about it. It's like, oh my gosh, the reality of this would be such a mess that I don't even I don't even know how to think about it. It starts to break your brain to think about.
It does break your brain, and it makes you realize why it's so much more fun when it is fun to watch Star Wars, because, you know, at the end of the day, you don't need to care about this unless you need to care about this. And it's
Exactly.
it is a lot of fun to peel it apart and take a look at these sorts of things. But what else is fun to peel apart and look at is your presence online and where people can find you, Master Rushing. So why don't you point people in the direction of where you are online?
Absolutely. You can find me all over the place with the name Matt Rushing02. You can also find me here on the network with a show called Owl Post. I did that with Drea Kaufman, and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You can also find me over on the TFM network doing a bunch of different shows. One is the 602 Club, where we talk about all of the fandoms that we love outside of Star Trek. And then I've got a lot of Star Trek talk over there as well, doing Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, Saddle Up, The Orb, and sometimes Literary Treks. But John, if people wanted to catch up and see what zaniness you are getting into...
Oh, I'm never zany. I'm always very, very serious, as demonstrated by these topics that we explore. You can find me as Kessel Junkie out there, and you can find me here on the network co-hosting a delightful, well, I think it's delightful, little show called House Lights with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, where we look at the works of directors by different time spans, categories, topics, all of those sorts of things. And I am just delighted that we covered this. And I actually am starting to get a little nervous, and I think I might need to test this food that I ordered from Kentucky Fried Porg. So, Master Rushing, let's head back to the temple, and maybe it's time to close these negotiations.
Negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.